Welcome inside this episode of 101 Sports. I'm Javid Blake. He's Correas. Today we'll be breaking down
the NFL Draft's best pass catchers,
the NHL Trade Deadline, and the latest Grand Prix from Italy in Formula One. It all starts right now. Welcome inside this episode of 101 Sports, and let's start things off by stepping up to the box for the quick hitters. Augusta last week was a big moment. The Masters, one of the most beautiful golf tournaments in all of the PGA Tour, finished up with MATSUYAMA winning the Masters, becoming the first Japanese player to win the event at 10 under. Great. What was your biggest takeaway?
I mean, Hideki Matsuyama, I told you this on Saturday's Masters. I said he's got a big lead, and he's not going to lose it going into Sunday, finishing 10 under, finishing one stroke ahead of Xander Schauffele, who he had to hold off. And I was watching the Masters, and I was like, it's getting a little close. Can Matsuyama, can he hold off Xander Schauffele? And then Xander Schauffele ended up shooting himself in the foot by having a good old triple on hole number 16. But Matsuyama, this is a big moment for Japan and for himself. Like you said, first Japanese player ever to win the Masters, and he's taking home that nice $2 million paycheck away from Augusta National. So, I mean, just a historic win for him, and gets to don that green jacket.
But how about Will Zalatoris coming in sporting, just looking the best on the golf course? The pink shirt with the flamingos on Saturday was looking probably the best dressed out of anyone on the golf course. He played magnificent as well and really put himself into a name of someone who can maybe win this event in the future.
I mean, who goes in there on their first career major, goes into Augusta National, and plays just phenomenal golf? He takes home a nice big check as well, mind you, and a former Wake Forest University alum. But I mean, he just comes in there. He's a young guy. I mean, he looks like Happy Gilmore's caddy, and he comes in and he just plays phenomenal golf. And then he goes out with just a huge win. I mean, finishing in the top 5, but also again, his first major ever, and he goes in and just has a phenomenal round of golf. Plays great, and he's going to be a guy to look for in the future. Remember the name, Will Zalatoris. But now moving on, Javik, sort of a sad topic for you and Patriots fans everywhere, as Julian Edelman announces his retirement, and I don't think he's going to go play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers like another former New England Patriot. But what are your thoughts on Julian Edelman? Is he a Hall of Famer or not?
See, that's the problem with this, and that's the problem in sports nowadays, is anytime anyone retires, everyone thinks, are they going to be a Hall of Famer? And you see it with the Phillies with Ryan Howard and Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley. As soon as they retired, everyone wasn't reflecting on the greatness of their career. It was, are they a Hall of Famer? No, Julian Edelman's not a Hall of Famer. Everybody knows that. But is he one of the most impactful Pats players of the past 20 years and helped build their second dynasty? Yeah, he was absolutely fantastic. He's one of the most clutch Pats players to ever put on the jersey, was always in the big moment, was loved universally by Pats fans, was a great guy for really the region of New England, was loved in Foxborough. And how about Jewish heritage coming up in a big way? Look at him go. It's a lot of fun to watch him. He was a lot of fun to watch. He's going to be really missed, but it was the time to go. The knees weren't there. You could see it, but hats off to Julian Edelman. One heck of a career.
And I mean, Julian Edelman, that was the problem his entire career, was that he was the second coming of Wes Welker, but he wasn't as good as Wes Welker. Wes Welker had over 900 catches, and Edelman was just north of 600. Wes Welker had over almost 10,000 yards, and Edelman was nowhere close. So, I mean, like you said, he was just a great piece of that second Pats dynasty, but he's just not a Hall of Famer. Because when I think NFL Hall of Famers, I think, Jerry Rice, Joe Montana, Ronnie Lott. I think those guys. Julian Edelman, he's just not in that category, nowhere close.
That's not the discussion you should be having with him anyways, though. It's supposed to be reflecting on his legacy as a Patriots player, not is he getting into the Hall of Fame, because that's an argument that's just not going to happen.
It's not there.
But the WNBA announces their schedule this week and the draft coming up. Dallas Wings have 3 of the first 5 picks. The New York Liberty, Sabrina Ionescu, the top draft pick last year out of Oregon, one of the best players in all of the WNBA, fails to get any help with the number 2 pick because, well, they traded it to Dallas, and Dallas is sitting pretty. They got the 1, they got the 2, they got the 5.
And I mean, the Dallas Wings, they're like the Philadelphia 76ers. They're trusting the process. 1, 2, and 5. So, I mean, obviously the number 1 pick is going to be Charlie Collier, who's the center out of Texas, averaged 19.5 points a game, double-digit rebounds, had about a block or 2 a game. She's going to be your big down low. And with, again, 2 through 5, I'm looking at 2 guards right now. Ari McDonald, who had a fantastic season with Arizona, led them to the Final Four. And now I'm looking at ACC Player of the Year, Dana Evans. Dana Evans had a phenomenal career at Louisville. Now she's going to the WNBA draft. And I think that she's just going to have a phenomenal, phenomenal rookie season, because WNBA, as we know, is based on fundamentals. And fundamentally, what you've looked for is you've looked for that guard and you've looked for the big. And the Dallas Wings have a definite opportunity to get into this draft and come out with a lot of capital.
Keeping it in the State UNC Center, Janelle Bailey currently projected to be the 17th overall pick to New York Liberty. Real quick, Gray, Champion League's semifinals, 2 English clubs making it, Chelsea, Man City. Biggest takeaway, what are your predictions?
I mean, Chelsea, I don't know how they're sitting pretty right now, and I don't know how they're doing it. I mean, not even the top 4 in England. Shout out Matt Laguza, West Ham United. But, I mean, Chelsea right now just playing phenomenal soccer, and this just comes... And I just don't know how they're doing it. I mean, Man City, you can see. PSG, you can see, who just beat Bayern. And Real Madrid playing phenomenally as well. Chelsea, kind of the redheaded stepchild right now. But Chelsea, just expect them to get just demolished by Real Madrid and expect a PSG and Real Madrid final.
Well, the legs get started in just a couple of days. When we come back, we'll talk NHL trade deadlines. We'll move on to position number 2 in the NFL. And we'll talk Formula One. We'll head to the racetrack in Italy. All that and more coming up. This is 101 Sports.
We're 2 weeks away from the NFL draft, and on this show, we've already covered quarterbacks, so might as well start covering some pass catchers. Gray Ost here alongside Matt Laguza. And Matt, we're going to break down our top 5 playmakers and our pass catchers today. And so, who you got for us at number 5? Because I guarantee you my list is going to be different than yours.
Well, number 5 is going to be the wide receiver out of Purdue, Rondale Moore. Now, Rondale Moore, he's one of the more forgotten players in this year's NFL draft. You know, he didn't play that much over the past 2 years, but people forget how good he is. In 2018, he had 114 receptions for over 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns. And on top of that, rushed for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns on top of that. The biggest downside for him is he is undersized. He's 5'9", 180 pounds, but he makes up for that with all of his talents. He's one of the fastest players in the draft. He has quick hands, he creates good separation off the line, and he is extremely versatile. He can play in the slot, outside, and even in the backfield if you need him to. He can really do anything you want.
And I mean, that was his main thing at Purdue, was to really go in and be that playmaker. He was that number 1 target, and he could run him out of a few gadget plays. But my number 5 is going to be the exact opposite of Rondale Moore. It's going to be a big play receiver out of LSU, and it's going to be Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall is a big guy for me, and he keeps getting slept on by everybody. He was one of those top 5 playmakers that LSU had during their national championship season. And I mean, he was the guy behind Jamar Chase. He was behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was overshadowed by Justin Jefferson. And people need to know, 4.38 speed out of a 6'3", 200+ pound frame. He's an insane red zone threat, and he's just getting slept on. 23 touchdowns in his last 19 games at LSU, and including another great season this year without Joe Burrow. So I think that people right now are sleeping on Terrace Marshall. But moving on to number 4. Number 4 for me, it's got to be Jaylen Waddle. I mean, he would have had a much better season if he had come in and not gotten hurt. And I mean, but he was just the clear Robin to Devonta Smith's Batman, who we'll get to later. But I mean, Jaylen Waddle, not the biggest, but I mean, he's got great numbers and he's got great speed. What do you see out of Jaylen Waddle?
Oh, there's no question. I've got him at number 4 as well. And this is going to be a big characteristic out of the top players in this year's draft at the receiving position, is the fact that they are undersized. But once again, Jaylen Waddle makes up with that with his speed. He's an outstanding playmaker. He's great in all levels of the field. He showed tremendous production at Alabama, and he's done a great job. He's an extreme deep threat. Once he gets by you, he's gone. There's no question about it. You are not catching him, and he has great hands. And no matter what his size is, he's going to be physical, he's tough, he's competitive, and he will beat you because of his determination.
And again, that's what we've seen so far through this draft process. When you look at players like Jaylen Waddle, Devonta Smith, like the wide receiver out of Purdue, what you mentioned is do you take their talent or do you take their size? Because you can, you take size so much into account, you account so much for the 40, or do you just take a guy who has the ability to make an impact and who can play football? That's really what the NFL draft is about. You've got to take that player who you know who can contribute or who can grow into contribute. Like, if you look at players like DK Metcalf, who slid all the way to the second round 2 years ago, he was a project, but he was big and he was fast. And if you look at players like DK Metcalf, they're big and they're fast and they can play. That's the big aspect, and that's what's gotten the Oakland Raiders in trouble over the years. Like when you look at players like Jamarcus Russell, they were big and they're fast, but they couldn't play. And so that's the thing with this year's draft. You got to take who can play, and that's who's going to determine who can go higher. And for my number 3 pick, I'm going Kyle Pitts, just off the fact that he had great contributions at the University of Florida. And he's that Darren Waller, he's that Jordan Reed type of tight end who's going to be great in the red zone. And he's also great in the open field. He's big and he's fast. 12 touchdowns this past season at Florida. But I'm guessing you have a different number 3 than I do, because you're pretty high on Kyle Pitts.
You've got Kyle Pitts at number 3. He is one of the most perfect physical specimens at tight end that we have seen in a long time. He's built like a tight end. He runs like a wide receiver. He is an absolute amazing player. We'll get to him in a minute, but for me, I've got DeVonta Smith out of Alabama, and the big reason why he's number 3 and not in that number 2 is because of his size. He's 175, and I'm not typically one to judge someone based on that. As I see in my top 5 pass catchers, I've got 3 players at under 182 pounds on here. But DeVonta Smith, he's the former Heisman Trophy winner in 2020, first wide receiver to do it since 1991, and he's got everything you want in a wide receiver skill-wise. Despite his size, he's tough, he's quick, he's got great hands, he's competitive, and he's definitely, probably skill-wise, a top 2 wide receiver in this draft, no question about it. But Kyle Pitts, he's at my number 2 right now. We'll go to him. With me, for number 1 and 2, they keep flip-flopping. This was a huge decision for me, and every week I kind of change my mind on it. For me, it's Kyle Pitts right now, and the one big reason for that is just his route running. It's not perfect. It's not exactly what you'd like to see. It's not very crisp. His cuts aren't very clean, but besides that, there's really not much else you can ask for. He's got a long wingspan. He's got great reach. Big, soft hands. He can make the tough play. For a tight end, his ability to create separation is pretty good. There's really nothing much you can ask for.
That's what I'm saying. You can see Darren Waller when you see Kyle Pitts, but Kyle Pitts was able to prove it in college, like I said, with 12 touchdown catches. He wasn't like Darren Waller, who came out of Georgia Tech running the triple option. But again, my number 2, I'm going to flip-flop with you. I'm going to go DeVonta Smith, because you cannot argue with a Heisman Trophy and 23 touchdown catches at Alabama. As soon as Jaylen Waddle went down, DeVonta Smith needed to step up, and he did. And that was my thing with DeVonta Smith. Again, he's a little skinny. He's a little on the slender side. He's about, 170. But again, he's just a football player. I say you take football players and you can always add weight. You can't always add raw talent and the ability to catch the football. And that's why DeVonta Smith is number 2. But I'm pretty sure, based on one serious omission that we both have, that we have the same number 1, and that's Ja'Marr Chase. Tell me why, and then I'll go.
Ja'Marr Chase, he's just the complete package right now. He's 6'1", 208, and he's got all the skills that DeVonta Smith has. That's why I have him as my wide receiver 1 over DeVonta. And, he's got the exact same skills. He had a pretty similar season in 2019. Obviously, Ja'Marr Chase opted out in 2020, and he didn't play. But he had a very similar season to what DeVonta had in 2019. Put up great numbers with Joe Burrow in that championship season. And there's really nothing else to say. He's got great separation, great hands, great size, great red zone threat. He's the perfect receiver coming out of this draft based on this draft class.
And that's his big thing right now is, like you said, 6'1", 208. It's that upper body strength and that ability to get away off the line of scrimmage. And he also has great feet as well. So if he runs those digs or if he runs those ins, then he can really be dynamic. And a perfect situation for him would be if he does go to Cincinnati. Pair him with A.J. Green and pair him with Joe Burrow, then obviously he's going to have a very successful NFL career. But that's going to do it from us here on the NFL side. NFL draft, like I said, 2 weeks away, April 29th. Matt Laguza, beautiful insight as well. We'll be right back here with more from the NHL Trade Deadline here on 101 Sports.
Well, in a normal year, we'd be talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs, but in a weird and wild 2020-2021 NHL season, we're talking about the trade deadline. Jacob Blake joined by Max Kreider. Max, a wild deadline. And let's first start off with Taylor Hall being shipped to Boston for the equivalent of a bucket of pucks and a cooler of Gatorade.
Absolutely, that's basically what happened. I would say shipping up to Boston, but I don't think Buffalo is south of Boston, so that joke wouldn't work as well. Regardless, Taylor Hall is a Boston Bruin now, all for the price of Anders Bjork, who may or may not be a figment of our imaginations, and a 2021 second-round pick. Curtis Lazar also went to Boston. So that was the whole trade, and Taylor Hall is finally out of the horrible situation he was in upstate New York. Instead of playing with Tage Thompson or Casey Middlestad at center, he gets to play with David Krejci, who isn't his prime self, but still a very good center overall. And Taylor Hall finally has a legitimate chance of perhaps winning a cup.
We don't want any Tice Thompson slander, though. Providence College hockey alumni, 2015 national champion as well. But with Taylor Hall to Boston, this kind of propels them. And they're a team that's right now in the thick of that hunt for that number 4 spot in the MassMutual East Division. The 3 teams kind of already set at the top, but they're a team that can kind of make a run at the end, and Hall hoping to push them over the line to get to the playoffs.
That is what they got Taylor Hall to do. And another player that they got that I feel fills a need is Mike Riley. A lot of people haven't really heard of him, mainly because he's been playing north of the border, first in Montreal, now in Ottawa, but I guess now in Boston. He fills the need at left defense because Matt Grzelcyk, going into the year, was their only left defenseman that I could name off the top of my head, and he was injured. So Mike Riley has 19 assists on the year, I believe. He will be good depth behind Matt Grzelcyk, and the Bruins, if their defensive core can get healthy, if McAvoy and Carlo can come back at full strength. Again, as I said, they might enter the playoffs as a 4 seed, but they could be that 4 seed that just goes bang like a train through everybody.
And the big thing about the East Division, the MassMutual East Division, that is that the 4 teams might be some of the 4 best teams in all of hockey. All of them are competitive. It's a division that has a lot of good teams. And the Buffalo Sabres just beating up on each other night in and night out. But we move to another division, and the Columbus Blue Jackets basically just became the Oklahoma City Thunder. They added 5 draft picks at the deadline, including 2 first-rounders in 2021 from the Leafs and the Lightning. This is a team that's really looking towards the future and eyes set on a couple of first-round picks.
This is a team that I honestly thought heading into this year would be competing for maybe second place in the Central, because they had added Max Domi from Montreal. They already had a pretty good core in place. Jonas Korpisalo had a valiant effort in last year's playoffs. But everything just fell apart. When they traded for Patrick Laine, he basically fell into the same trap Pierre-Luc Dubois fell into, and that's mildly infuriating Tortorella.
And not playing. How do you not play? That's the biggest question about this. How do you not play Patrick Laine? What good are you doing benching him? That's something that hasn't made any sense, and it's completely tanked any chance this team has of getting out of the regular season.
Absolutely, but regardless of that, Columbus is gearing up for the future. They got 3 first-round picks, as you said, for players that are still very good, but don't feel like they warrant first-round picks. Obviously, David Savard going to my Tampa Bay Lightning, reigning, defending, undisputed Stanley Cup champions of the world. And David Savard fills the one thing that I feel like Tampa Bay needs aside from a backup goaltender is right defense. Because Eric Chernak, as good as he is, I can't really see him as a number 1 right defenseman right now. And David Savard and Eric Chernak are going to be a good 1-2 punch in terms of shutdown righties. As for the Leafs, they got Nick Foligno, who is the former Blue Jackets captain, and he's going to do a great job of filling their needs for bottom 6 gritty guys. But for a first-round pick and a couple of fourths, I honestly don't see why they'd pay that price. And one more interesting tidbit, both of those trades had those players retained at 75% salary, which meant that both players had to go through one other team. So Savard went through Detroit. They retained 25% of his 50% retained contract. And Nick Foligno went to the Sharks and then to the Leafs. Both players had those retentions. So now Sharks fans get to talk about the great time they had with Nick Foligno up in the club with Mike Hoffman.
For all of, well, a day, maybe.
Yeah,
But let's
exactly.
move over to the losers side of things. Your 3 big losers is a team that's still searching for their first Stanley Cup, in which the league has more than 6 teams in the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Toronto traded 6 different picks. One of those we just talked about going to the Blue Jackets. North of the border is a team that really is going all in this year, and if they don't win, it's not looking too hot for the next couple of years.
It also won't be looking too hot for my lungs because I might just cough them out from laughing if they don't end up winning it. Especially if they don't win in the first round, I will not be on this show anymore because I will be dead of laughter. But the Toronto Maple Leafs, they kind of panicked into just getting as many players as they could. David Riddick they got for a 2022 third, and I don't know if they plan to bring Riddick in as their starter. Like, he's been the backup to Markstrom, Talbot before him too. And so Toronto kind of just threw away all of their picks for guys that will be with a team for probably at most this year. And you can argue that Toronto already has a whole bunch of futures in their system, like Rodion Amirov, to headline that forward core of the future. And I can see that, but still I don't feel there was as much of a need for Toronto to buy as much as they did, given their lead in the Canadian division, the North Division.
So with your winners and losers down the stretch one, what's the biggest storyline you're going to see coming out of the trade deadline that we should watch for the next couple of weeks?
The biggest story I feel like will be just who's going to be able to make it out of the West Division, because St. Louis was a team I felt wouldn't buy or sell at the deadline, despite a lot of guys and people in the media saying that they would sell, and that's because everyone is healthy now. Robert Thomas, out with an injury. Colton Parayko, out with an injury for a while. Tyler Bozak, out for an injury for a while. I'm not going to keep you guys here much longer just listing off names. But regardless, my point is, St. Louis has everyone healthy at the right time, and so that's why guys like Mike Hoffman, who were heavily rumored to be leaving St. Louis, are still there, and their core's in place. And even though Binnington's had not as good of a year as he should be, they might be able to go on a bit of a run themselves.
Well, Jordan Binnington is also going after people when he gets yanked from games and trying to punch him with his blocker. But nonetheless, Max, thanks more for joining us. Hockey season still rolling on, a couple of weeks away from the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We'll have all your information for you throughout the next couple of weeks. When we come back, we'll have even more on this episode. This is One-on-One Sports. Whose side are you on?
Go Bolts.
No.
Yes.
Bahrain saw it all in the Grand Prix #1 of the 2021 Formula One season. Now, after a 3-week break that has fans ready to get back to racing, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix coming up this weekend at Imola. We're joined by Matt Laguzin. Matt, first off, thanks so much for joining us. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. We're ready. Everyone's ready for this 3-week break to end. Drive to Survive comes out. Everyone's binging on Netflix. Bahrain comes up. What a great race that was. Really exciting towards the end. It was a great battle between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Now a 3-week break. Everyone's sort of ready to get back. And the big question going into Imola is going to be Verstappen versus Hamilton. They were neck and neck really all race long in Bahrain. A hard charging Verstappen looked to pass Lewis Hamilton, but on a technicality went off the track, had to give back the place, which gave Lewis Hamilton the victory, and Mercedes in 1 and 3 with Valtteri Bottas coming in third. Does Max Verstappen sort of have that ability to compete with Lewis Hamilton in this race, and is the car enough?
See, that's going to be the question all season long. Can Max Verstappen compete? And he can. But the problem is, Lewis Hamilton, he's been the world champion for years now. And he's got a great car behind him in Mercedes. And Red Bull, they've been doing a really good job developing a car, developing a team behind Christian Horner as their team chief. But the problem is they still can't get that extra boost up over Mercedes. And right now, Max Verstappen's looking good. And I think he can compete, but it's going to be extremely difficult, especially since there's a good chance for rain this weekend that he can get past Lewis Hamilton.
And the big thing is going to be rain this weekend. Everyone, fingers crossed the rain comes down, get those rain tires out, get racing in the wetness and the rain in Italy. But we move over from two teams that are very good in Mercedes and Red Bull to a team that's usually third and since the last couple of years has really turned down in Ferrari. Monza in 2020 was their big, really falling apart party in Italy. A car that just can't drive, can't handle, doesn't have the speed to keep up with Red Bull and Mercedes. What's going on with this team?
Monza last year was just an absolute disaster. In qualifying, they finished P13 and P17, and both their cars had to be retired in the race on Sunday. An absolute disaster for their 1,000th Grand Prix history of Ferrari. It's the homecoming for them, and it was one of their worst weekends that they've had in their history. This year's going to be a huge year for them. One race down already. Didn't have a great finish from them. They finished last year in 6th place in the constructors' rankings. And this year, it's going to be huge. They have not improved their car enough, and I think they're going to end up being in the exact same place they were in last year. It's going to be difficult for them.
And the big thing coming into this year is teams weren't really allowed to change their car as much. And we heard it a lot, especially if you watch Drive to Survive, the interviews with Charles Leclerc about how the car can't handle and just doesn't run as well as it had in previous years. The big thing for Leclerc was winning Monza in 2019 to all the fanfare. Carlos Sainz comes into the team this year, replaces Sebastian Vettel, who goes over to Aston Martin. What does Sainz bring to the table that Vettel might not have been able to bring to in recent years?
Sainz is a great driver. He had a great season over at McLaren where they finished 3rd last year, which is a great step up for McLaren. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Sainz, he's a great driver. He's got good experience. He's brought a couple podiums in his career, and I think it's a good number 2 driver behind a young Leclerc, and it's gonna give Ferrari a nice chance to maybe not get up to their top 3 position with what they're used to, but it could definitely help them not finish as bad as last year, because Sainz, he's a good driver. Leclerc, good driver. It's just going to be very tough with the car that they have, no matter how good of a driver you are, to be able to finish in a good position.
And Charles Leclerc coming off the longest contract extension Ferrari's given to any driver in their history of F1, which spans 50-plus years, the entirety of the F1 series. Beyond that, though, the team that is really coming up and is brand new, McLaren Racing, led by the lone American team principal in Zach Brown. Big, bold American is really how this team has run. They got Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, who might be 2 of the most fun people on the entire grid. And this is just a fun team to watch. And they've really completely upended the top 3. It's no longer Ferrari, it's McLaren. They got a good car, and they got 2 really, really good drivers.
Oh, no question about it. Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris are 2 of the most exciting drivers and personalities in all of F1. Daniel Ricciardo brings tons of experience. He's got 31 career podiums. And Lando Norris, one of the best young drivers in all of Formula One. He's had a good start to his young career. And as you said, they have been on the rise. Their car has been improving. I mentioned Carlos Sainz. He was on the team last year. He had a good season. And that's the thing. They have been extremely consistent, and that's going to be the key. And you know what? I could see them making a big push in Italy this weekend. You know, they've had success. If they can keep it going, I would not be surprised to see them close to the top of their leaderboard this week.
And the big thing with Lando Norris finishing P4 in Bahrain, second to last race last year in Bahrain. Also saw him get his first podium, which saw George Russell finish 9th, in which he stepped in for Lewis Hamilton for going from Williams to a Mercedes car. And on the topic of Williams, the lower tier of teams, Williams and Haas, they're sort of figuring things out. Is there someone we should really look to in those bottom 2 teams?
It's definitely something to look forward to. You know, it's always nice to see one of those bottom teams really make a push. We saw Racing Point, which is now Aston Martin now, make a push last year early in the season. And it's always exciting to see it. It's obviously going to be extremely difficult being one of those teams. But, you know what? It's definitely possible. Anything can happen in F1, and that's what's great about it. So we'll see what happens, but there's definitely something to look forward to in those 2 teams.
Big thing this year on the back end, George Russell may be racing his way into a Mercedes seat in the coming years. And Yuki Tsunoda with AlphaTauri, one of the newest drivers on the grid, a rookie, really having a great race in Bahrain, hoping to continue it. Let's go to this weekend, though. Imola, who do you got winning the whole thing?
Right now, it's got to be Lewis Hamilton. I see Mercedes getting 2 spots on that podium this weekend, but once again, Max Verstappen's going to split them up with P2.
Well, all right, the prediction from Matt is going to see Lewis Hamilton go P1, Max Verstappen P2, Valtteri Bottas P3, and if you're McLaren, you're hoping Lando Norris repeats that P4 finish from Bahrain. Matt, thanks so much for joining us. When we come back, we'll have much, much more. This is 101 Sports.
Thanks for watching another episode of 101 Sports.
Make sure to follow us on social media on Twitter and Instagram at 101 Sports. You can find us on YouTube on our YouTube channel, 101 Sports.
Thanks for watching, and as always, whose side are you on?